on an assumption that what we talk about today, which is further discussion about the Alberta economy, drawing on the recent survey information that we gathered over the month of April. Now, I've shared that information in the form of the newsletter that you may well have opened on Monday or during the week, or you may not have. And if you have read it, then you may already have some questions, because what I'd like to do is get you oriented to the initial information in that survey, which is what I call an overview. I'll share some of the slides, and I'll ask for an open discussion about any one of them, or the process that was undertaken and what the conclusions are that we may well draw from all of this. Next week, I'll focus more, not on the high level overview, but on the economic resilience of the province on a locational basis, and that is based on its regions. And then the following week, I'll look at it by industry, profession, and public services. And then as we draw the month to a close, I'll focus on the effectiveness of the innovation ecosystem from the perspective of the network, with the last week then being on recommendations and conclusions. So as we discussed in general with panel support, economic resilience last month, we're now going to discuss it this month from your perspective, and that is, what is the network's viewpoint about the province's economy, its resilience, the role of government, and the effectiveness of the innovation ecosystem. So that's what I'm going to be up to, and I'm going to start sharing a screen and show you this slide over here, this one. What this slide, if you can see it.
We don't have it yet, Barry.
You don't have it yet?
No.
No.
Okay, bear with me. Let's see what, as I said, we're going to have to go through. Are you seeing that?
No.
No, why not?
I don't know.
Okay, hold on.
There's sometimes a delay.
Share screen. Screen sharing is stopped. Okay, so okay is closed. So now I'll put share. Can you see that?
Now,
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, that's not the one I want to show you. So I'm going to do it again. So we'll
Just
Go
don't
back to
take
Bo
any
Derek.
awkward pictures.
take this one off. I had it was all set to look good.
Go back to Bo Derek on the beach.
Yeah. Okay. Can you see this?
yeah.
Yes.
Yes.
See that?
It's
Okay. This slide is the summary data of all of the input on the first question, which was, is Alberta's economy economically resilient? And on a scale from 1, which is not, to 5, which is very, the overall average was 2.68. Now I'm only looking at the black left. To be neutral or 3 would imply that you had 50% of those seeing it as resilient, 50% seeing it as not resilient. That would all balance out at a 3. So we're approaching 3. If we look at this over time, and I'm now going to exit this. I think I'm going to exit this. I'll do a new share. I am now going to show you another one, which looks at this over time. And see if I can find this one quickly. I got to close that. You can smile at one another while I'm doing this. Well, maybe I'll show this one first. Full screen, share. Can you see this?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, so when I just asked, is the province's economy economically resilient? And you can see it's weak, it's under 3. When we ask them, what are the most sensitive measures of resilience? It's interesting because this is consistent year after year. We've been doing this through 2015. The highest has typically been corporate investment, which is still up there at 57% of the respondents noted corporate investment. But the ones that are always there and always high relate to jobs, unemployment or employment increasing and decreasing, or jobs being created or losses. The rest, and the ones that economists often refer to as GDP, is one of the weakest. Personal bankruptcies, corporate bankruptcies tend to be weaker measures of economic resilience, but jobs and corporate investment are always high. One that I've always been particularly interested is in and out migration, because we talked for years about the massive numbers of people coming into the province. And when things become bleak, then out migration increases. And we saw that in the fall, last fall, we saw that rising considerably. It's drifted back again, which is consistent with the increase in people's belief that we're beginning to see some recovery. So with some recovery, of course, the interest in leaving the province declines. Okay, I'm going to find another slide that I'd like to share with you as well. And by the way, if you want any clarification or you want to see, okay, so this is on a bar chart, taking that first question, which is the province's economy economic resilient? 49% said not, 19% not resilient, 30% somewhat not resilient, neutral 15%, and those seeing it as somewhat resilient were 35%, but only 1% viewed it as very resilient at all. What has happened since the fall, and I'll show you a comparison in a moment, is there's been an increase in a belief of resilience, even though it's still only at 36%, but it was even lower than that in the fall. Where have those votes come from? They've come from not resilient. But what was interesting is they didn't all move from not resilient to resilient. Many moved to neutral. In other words, a degree of uncertainty is just where the economy has risen. That was somewhat interesting because I've typically viewed any vote a neutral as a measure of uncertainty on whether to go with not or it is resilient. So we are seeing some drift or some shifting from not resilient to increasing resilient for whatever reason or whatever it is that they're measuring, whether it be corporate resistance or the decrease in unemployment. The next one is one of the most interesting slides that I present at all, if I can find it quickly without embarrassing me and you. Can you see anything right now while I'm fiddling around?
Yes, you and us.
Oh, you can see what I'm up to.
No, you can't.
You can't, okay. I'm going to show you a slide briefly. Okay, let's see if I can show this one to you. Okay, go back to full view, full screen, go to share, this one. Can you see this one?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
It's the first one you used.
Yes. Thank you. You've been paying attention. So what we have here is a lot of information, but I'll explain it to you. Looking to the far left, you see the data we had in the fall of 2015, which is almost, well, 5 years ago. And what you saw, it was weak. It was below 2.5. So this scale, if it went all the way up to 5, would be showing resilience. But here we're only showing economically not resilient because the average votes were below neutral. And they were down around 2.31. And then by the spring of 2016, which is when oil had come down in pricing, which is what you'll see in the bottom, that blue line in the bottom shows the price of oil on a logarithmic scale. So it had dropped from $60 down to around 25. And accordingly, the views on the economic resilience of the province fell, looking like the measures of economic resilience, while they may relate to corporate investment and jobs, really tracked what was going on in the oil and gas industry. And the sentiment, and that is the word cloud or the comments that were made, certainly echoed that people were saying the province's economy is not resilient because it's heavily reliant on the overall price of what's happening in the oil and gas industry. And that's certainly reflected here. And as you see, from the spring of 2016 to the spring of 2018, you see that line gradually rising, but you also see the price of oil gradually rising, which is, again, consistent with the view that the assessment of Alberta's resilience is parallel to the reliance on oil. And until we become not reliant on oil, that line will likely continue to reflect the price of oil and resilience as well. And you see that drop in the fall of 2018, again, reflecting the drop in oil. And then you see it dropping again between the spring of 2019 and the fall of 2020 for that brief drop, which was quite significant, down into the $20 range. In fact, it even went negative for, I think, was it 3 days or 3 weeks?
Yeah.
Anybody remember that? Yeah, I see a few
Yes.
nodding heads.
Yeah.
But something's been going on since the fall of 2020. That was last fall till this spring. We've seen the biggest rise that I've ever seen since we started measuring this up until the spring. And we have seen considerable recovery, but we're seeing recovery, well, we thought presumably in COVID, but certainly recovery now. Oil is up around $60, $65 as it was this spring. So that seems to be reflected again. Now that dotted line is because we didn't do the survey twice in the fall of 2019 and the spring of 2020. I'll reflect on the red line later when we get to economic resilience, the effectiveness of the innovation ecosystem. But those bubbles at the top, those colorful bubbles, are simply that a monitor that we have of the arrow that we wanted to see continuing to rise, but it's reflecting basically the score that we have in the black line. But it was just a convenient way graphically of showing with one image what a particular seasonal measure looked like. So that's in essence what we have as an overview of economic resilience. That data can also be related to people's location. So we did ask them what their location was by country, by province, by region, and by city or town. And what I'll talk about next week is how this data differs between Alberta's rural regions, Edmonton and Calgary regions. And then, as I said, the following week, I'll look at it by industry. All of these are quite interesting. And I've been trying to find over the years a credible organization that would be interested in taking this survey data on, in that I'm not interested in doing it the rest of my life. So if any of you have any ideas, I did have a discussion with Todd Hirsch this last week, and he's pointed out that there's a new business development council in Alberta that is not government, that might be interested in having a monitoring or a tracking mechanism, which is in essence what I use this for. It's almost a branding device. The economic developers of Alberta share the survey and the survey data with their members, and they would be a logical body. The Alberta Council of Technologies was the originator of the survey, and the Ontario Council of Technologies, which we're currently populating and assembling a board, has expressed some interest in also doing the survey in Ontario. It would be interesting to look at any comparative information we'd have in Alberta with what's going on in Ontario. And initial discussions are that they're less interested in diversification in Ontario. They're more interested in diversity in the workforce and social influences, social factors than economic factors. And I don't know whether that will hold when it comes to doing the survey out there, but I've found a little difference in the conversation that we have in Ontario versus the conversation we have in Alberta. And it's probably a reflection of how difficult the economy has been in Alberta with the boom bust cycles, which aren't reflected in Ontario, or at least based on the same commodity, and that being oil prices. So any questions or observations or boring or anything you want to share with me?
Yeah, I'm wondering, do we have any stats on the contribution of advanced technology sector to the Alberta economy?
Yes, I can tell you what that data, I didn't gather that data, but that data is available. And we know that the percentage of GDP contributed by the oil and gas industry has been dropping. And so one might say that from 23% to 18% or something of that magnitude does appear to be what's happening. We are seeing reduced or increased diversity, and that is more GDP based on other industries than just oil and gas. But oil and gas it's not at 50%, it's not at 80%, it's down around 25% as I recall. But that data is available from economists.
Well, I'm thinking there's so much of our sense of resilience. It's based on our gut intuitions and perceptions, not the reality. And I wonder if we could tell a better narrative if we were, to let the truth be known about the relative influence of different sectors. Maybe we are in fact more resilient than we think we are.
Well, the point, you've walked right into a very, very interesting discussion, because we could look at quantitative data, and I just gave you an example of it, and say, look, at the province is diversified. Only let's say 25% of the economy is oil and gas based, and yet the sentiment of the individuals in the province is different. Now, what's the fact? What is the fact? Is the fact sentiment? Well, if you're a voter and you're a politician, you want to know how individuals feel, regardless of what the actual GDP data may be.
But we're in a position to influence, the information that's out there, right? We can, get the message out that, hey, Alberta, we're not just about oil and gas. Look at the facts here about our economy.
Very, very good point. And the people in Calgary would say to you, I'll tell you what the facts are. My next door neighbor is unemployed and I'm unemployed too. And the downtown corridor is empty right now. And so even though it's 25%, we're seeing a lot of pain. The interesting thing about the oil and gas industry is the radiation effect is much broader than just on oil and gas. So we might say that oil and gas industry represents 25% of GDP, but we haven't asked the question of how much influence does the oil and gas have on other sectors of the economy? And it's enormous.
Yes, that's true.
Yeah, lots of knock on for sure. Trevor Toombs did a really good presentation earlier this week that really quantified a lot of this stuff, and he recorded it. So if you go to his site, there's some amazing information there. And I think they had the oil and gas sector somewhere around 18% to 20%.
Yep.
And then I also have access through Rainforest Alberta, some of the ecosystem data, number of businesses and that sort of stuff. So that would be, maybe we could bring that into this conversation at some point, because there's a lot of different stuff that's going on there as well. So,
well, I'm familiar with the influence of oil and gas on the tourism industry, because I was involved in putting the strategic direction together for that industry a few years ago. And I'll tell you, the impact of oil and gas industry on tourism in rural Alberta is enormous.
Yeah.
Because tourism centers on hotel revenues.
Yeah.
And who occupies the hotels when the rigs are out there is the oil and gas industry. And when the rig count is down, the hotels suffer. And when the oil price is down, the number of rigs goes down.
Yeah.
So when you begin to see the radiation effect, and then you get into gambling and how much money actually flows from the pockets of those in the oil and gas industry in the field services, you begin to see the dollar earned by a barrel of oil radiates throughout the province and has a bearing even on public sector expenditures.
Yeah.
So
Industries that are really hot right now. I was just at a site yesterday in a contractor building multiple houses in an area that had homes that were really huge at one time, and they're all quite run down. But this guy's business is just absolutely booming, and he's employing people all over the place. Anything connected with the forest industry is just going gangbusters right now.
well, and I think
agriculture, agriculture is doing great because it's time,
I think we'll see that when we get to industries and professions and public services, as we saw in the fall. The industries that were really suffering were tourism and transportation, which was obviously tourism
we hear about that a lot.
COVID related. So anything with the word public tied into it that called for people congregating, whether it was restaurants or the Oilers or the Calgary Flames, anything to do with entertainment was suffering significantly, and we'll see that. But that's COVID. That's more COVID related.
I talked to a farmer with 5 sections of land yesterday. He says he's never made so much money because of canola and barley. That's what they grow. So
Yeah,
So-
but there's ups and downs in the agriculture that don't relate to these other things because it's an industry that's dependent on international trade. And right now, the Chinese are driving no matter what the media says, the Chinese are driving the crop industries.
Right.
The one industry though that is more dependable to look at and compare that we seldom use is the forest products industry, because that industry serves the local industry as well as the national and international industry in some sort of balance. Agriculture and food are very much only really driven in this province by international buyers.
A couple of the interesting things about forestry's influence on the economy, which right now, by the way, and we saw that last fall, is forestry mining were and among the highest, is forestry's just gone through the roof. They've never seen prices so high, and that demand is the renovation industry. And to some extent, the disasters that occur associated with climate change. We've seen that rise as well, even with the pine beetle.
Yeah.
But forestry is hot right now, that's for sure. But what we see is the impact of that on northern Alberta, Grand Prairie in particular, is significant, but not all over the province. It's regionally specific. Just
Okay.
as agriculture in southern Alberta is booming and has a bearing on central Alberta as well, and manufacturing in central Alberta is doing quite well. So we've got regional differences, which, by the way, says we've got diversity in the economy. You may not see it on within your region, but when you look at the province as a whole, that you see individual regions bring individual strengths. So Edmonton is very heavy in public sector or public services. And when it's up because government is flush with revenue, the province leads the way. When Calgary is rocking or failing, you see the impact of what's happening in Calgary. And because oil and gas is so pervasive and public services is so pervasive, those two get a lot of attention.
Hmm.
A couple of things, and I indicated to others that were here a little early. And by the way, if you want to ever show up early for a webinar, some of the best conversations occurs before we get started and before we had too much scotch.
This is
said
Barry.
Yeah.
As the moderator, you should, when we were, I've been in the broadcast business all my life, and when we would go in to do a news story, we never ever brought up anything really interesting with the interviewee. We avoided that so that, there wasn't a sense that you repeated yourself. And secondly, that you would then go in and get the really good stuff on camera. Otherwise, it would be gone, right? So it was always a matter of not just doing niceties. Oh, the weather's been bad, Okay, here we go. Bang, you go in and start hitting them, right? You should do that here. Leave off the good stuff at the beginning. Anyway, I'm just.
Some of the stuff that I pick up early is just getting acquainted and getting a sense of what people's individual interests are. And it's always useful then in the course of the webinar. Or even if you're sitting in a bar having a conversation and you want to introduce a couple of people to one another, you want to introduce them to one another based on common interests. So I'm always trying to find out what people's interests are. And then I sort of have them labeled in my head that if someone walks into the room and wants to talk about film, well, I'll introduce them to Tom and Alona. If someone wants to talk about autism or public health or the challenges that parents face with, then I bring in Ling, and I know Earl came into the province from Chicago and ended up in Assumption, and just why and what brought him there. Getting to know the personalities in a small group. I mean, if we ever get really too big for that, then so be it. But it's what this is meant not to be as much an educational event as it is to be doing what we used to do in the bar, and that is having a conversation with one another.
Yeah.
And if you rather just have conversations, then chat it up and get to know one another and go offline. But given the format of webinars, we did see you needed a little bit of leadership, and that's why we've created a theme and try to keep that theme moving to draw more people in or to enable people to decide whether to show up or not to show up.
I certainly liked your idea about having that, a business development council or some group formed around that's not the government to kind of observe this economic data so that it's something that we can monitor and then compare with what the government's having to say, because I think there's two different stories that get shared.
Well, Peter, you've also led me to make another observation, because when I started this in 2015 through the Alberta Council of Technologies, one of the motives was to keep diversification on the table instead of waiting till the next election. Because what we would see is we'd see a lot of, quote, government or political pontificating about the need for diversity, and then nothing would happen.
Yeah.
And then we'd have another promise 4 years later. So, Randy, the topic of diversification, we need to educate the public a little bit about a point you made earlier is we've got a diversified province, but the province remains dependent on the price of oil and gas, because the radiation effect, called the Dutch disease by some in economics, is massive.
Yeah.
And we've got a lot of employment that is directly or indirectly affected by the price of oil, and it hasn't changed. It hasn't changed a lot.
Yeah, I guess my only comment there, Perry, and I'm getting more concerned all the time. I do a lot of work with pension managers across North America, and boy, oh boy, is there ever called ESG, environmental social governance, that they're all facing now, and they're coming out on such a negative basis towards this whole environmental thing. And Alberta's always at the brunt of the topic, to the point where a lot of the major pension fund companies are actually trying to avoid anything that's energy related. And God, that's a serious situation for us in Alberta.
Do any of you read the National Post?
What have it? Yes.
I really suggest, because most of you seem to have an interest in the economy, that you take out a subscription to the National Post. And I'll tell you why. They have a very good article today on just exactly this topic, and expressing concern that this is a market play. They were drawing the distinction between what drives the flow of capital and what long-term and short-term, and it is returns. And the view in this particular editorial is a lot of this ESG is being driven by marketing.
Yes.
And that the reality is you can throw as much money as you want at these particular issues. You're not going to budge the needle a bit, and the market will begin to sense that. And this will be viewed as a short-term bubble, because capitalists look for return on investment, not 20 years from now, but based on what their market, which is the investors' expectations are.
Yeah.
And you're not going to get quick returns on ESG.
And they're very nervous as well about, hedging on or having the business built on just green credits or green premiums or carbon credits. It's interesting. Randy, I don't know you, but I would say that this ESG thing, in my view, is a way for the province to actually position itself in such better light, because they're actually very good at doing, the energy industry extremely well. And if you actually scored, from stem to stern, the energy sources that we provide, it's a good story, and it's in a worldwide metric. So it's not coming from Alberta, because everything that comes from Alberta sounds like it's, we're just defending the oil and gas industry. This is coming from the outside of Alberta. So I think we can actually tie into it quite nicely and show how we're extremely good at it.
Yeah. I had a really good conversation with Doug Horner a couple of weeks ago, and he was so involved in the provincial game for so many years. He's a fascinating guy to listen to, and he said we're just doing a very good job of promoting how good we are and all the things that we really have to offer in Alberta. We get carried away into all these other side topics so quickly, but it is a concern from the investment industry. I tell you, I'm just not comfortable the way this is heading.
Look at to change brand is extremely difficult.
Yeah.
I mean, and we're on the inside. We're not on the outside. We're not sitting in Chicago or sitting in New York, where you get a 10-second buzz about what Alberta is. And so what you're hearing about Alberta is a very narrow perspective. And I think it was Bill Clinton, when he was in town, made note of the fact that, look, you guys are on a world stage. That was when the oil sands was just beginning to boom. And we were telling the world that we have the second largest or the largest oil reserves in the world. Boy, that stuck. Now what do we tell them? Now we're going to tell them it's the cleanest. Well, it's going to take a while to get that brand changed. So we did a very effective job in branding Alberta as an energy center in the world. And now we wish to change that brand or shift it or modify it. And it ain't easy. And the flow of capital today is looking for green and clean.
We need to start telling the world how dirty the oil in California is. Some of the dirtiest in the world.
Yeah, well,
In Wyoming.
California's got a lot of money to spend on marketing Hollywood and marketing a lot of things other than what it isn't.
Exactly.
It's awfully hard to brand something that isn't.
Yeah.
It's getting harder to brand anything these days when there's such strong overcurrents. I mean, today, seems like most people in the developed world would have, no more fossil fuel energy whatsoever. They'd like to have it turned off today, even though their houses are heated and their cars are still driven with petroleum. But there's this big divide between reality and perception. And with the information overload, it's hard to kind of correct that mentality. A lot of it's driven by fear. And people won't hear another message because they're so locked on to this worldview.
So let's pick that point up, not to move away from ESG, but I think you've made a really interesting observation, Randy, and something my wife and I, in a conversation in 2 rocking chairs, were having over the weekend. Gee, wasn't life simpler when we had someone we could trust? We could talk to our doctor about what we should do, and our doctor would tell us what to do, and that was good enough. But now we have a population that's educated. Hell, most of them are getting college degrees, which gives them the right and the authority and the comfort and the confidence to be able to challenge what it is. They're all critical thinkers now. And on top of it, they can go to Facebook, they can go to the internet, they can canvass the world for knowledge. And so when they go to see their doctor today, and their doctor says, well, my opinion is X and Y, and they say, well, my opinion is A and B, let's have a conversation. Why is my view different than yours, doctor? And the doctor says, well, look at my certificate. I spent umpteen years getting a foundation of knowledge, and I see a lot of people. And then the individual says, yeah, but I was on Facebook yesterday and I saw X, Y, and Z. Would you like to be, quote, an authority today? Does anybody trust anybody anymore? And the conversation we had is, gee, wasn't life simpler? Yeah. My grandmother traveled 5 miles away from the place she was born. She didn't understand why our television set and her television set had the same programs on them. Radio was brand new to her in her lifetime. So in 1 or 2 generations, the world has shrunk enormously. The levels of education, the rate of change, the amount of technology. Boy, it's gotten confusing. We talk about the future of the professions, where knowledge is becoming a commodity. Another conversation I had today with one of the universities in Canada calling me, thinking I was representing the Alberta Council of Technologies, but no longer, and saying, we are, as a university, are in trouble. We're losing our foreign students because of COVID. Our research isn't viewed as relevant by industry. We have no relationship established with our alumni other than asking for handouts. Our university's knowledge base is based on deans who graduated 30 years ago and know nothing about the new technologies that are coming at us faster than the speed of light. We're very hierarchical. We've got administrative overloads, and the government has just cut us back to the point that we've got to lay off hundreds, if not 1,000 staff. So he said, what do you recommend that we do in terms of rebuilding or rethinking our curriculum and our role?
Good point.
There are public institutions in Canada in education and in health as well that are having to do a complete rethink of these hierarchical, status quo based organizations that had a base of knowledge and a level of trust that are really being shaken today, not so much by COVID, but by the fact that their clients have changed.
Well,
Hmm.
big deal right now is I share with people because I'm very much into the electronic ecosystem or the technology side is the just customer shift on the way people buy and observe, and that includes businesses. So it's not so much the supply, it's the customers and how they acquire. And
That's exactly my point, Peter.
yeah, yeah,
You've heard me say this before, that the word client, which is
Yeah.
who professionals serve, that the client was one step above a slave in Roman times,
yeah,
because the client was subservient to the professional who had the knowledge that they didn't have. Well, today they think they have the knowledge. So
Yeah.
now they shop. They're informed consumers. That's exactly what markets are built on, is an informed consumer. Whether they're informed correctly or by fact or not is another matter, but they think
Yeah.
they're informed.
Yeah.
That changes the nature of the professional client relationship to more relation. Instead of hierarchical, it's become more relational, more on a same level.
Yeah.
The doctor doesn't have that hierarchical power anymore of take your medicine and go home. I'm not going to do that. I want to have a conversation. How many people, I heard today, 18% of Canadians believe that COVID is a hoax. Now, how'd you like to have one of those as your quote client?
Yeah.
They're not even going to come to your office, much less take the vaccine. And they're going to go out and spread stuff that might not ordinarily have been spread when the public health official said, stay home. I'm not staying home. I'm going to church. I mean, we are in a very, very difficult time for anybody in quote authority to exercise authority. And the media plays it like a fiddle. I mean, they love the stories.
Yeah, they need these ups and downs just to get people to watch. Yeah.
So how do I advise the university? Well, my comment to him was, foundational knowledge is probably still going to be there when you're going to exercise health and education, et cetera, and engineering. But you got to start focusing more on these relational skills, because the market has shifted, and the engineer is going to need to take Toastmasters. And the doctor is going to need some relational skills besides understanding how the liver functions and what it looks like when you open them up. You're going to have a conversation with people about, what does this mean? What it's going to mean to your lifestyle? You might have to talk to his wife beforehand. A whole set of skills are going to get called for because the patient ain't patient anymore. So your curriculum needs to reflect that.
It might be time to rotate out some of those tenured professors that have been there for 45 years.
And you're probably going to need to develop some advisory or experiential relationships, because you're now going to sell experience, meaning you're going to give the student some real experience before he actually goes out as a practitioner. So you're going to have relationships possibly with unions and with industries that you've never had to develop those relationships with before, because you're always viewed as more theoretical than practical, and everybody wants practical now.
My comment, Perry, is that as much as we look at the US with disdain sometimes, they've done a lot of things right there regarding supporting their public education or universities. When you think of the alumni support of the American universities compared to Canadian, which is virtually zero, we have a huge problem.
Let me show you something, because you're making a point that I feel compelled to give you the short form of the point that you're making. Show me the Canadian University handshake. How many of you graduated, first of all, from Canadian University? Exactly. Paul, you're the first one who got it right. That's the Canadian University handshake. That's its relationship with its alumni. Not this, not building a relationship, but the first thing they do after graduation is give us some of your money.
Yeah.
And that was my comment to this university today, as I said, you have alumni that if I were in a US private college university and somebody cut me back 50 million, the first place I would go to is my place of support, and that's my alumni. But you don't even know who your alumni are. And I know that because I organize reunions, and they never knew who their students were because they hadn't built a relationship up with them. So that's the first thing you've got to do in your public sector, is begin to help them become more market responsive. And the only way to do that is start cutting back funding. would force them to rethink their long-term relationships from the value of their patron being the government to the value of the patron being the citizens of Canada that have been footing the bill to date.
Peter, let me support you. There's a friend of mine, John McDougall, former president of NRC. You probably know this gentleman.
Yeah,
former
I do.
Chamber of Commerce president. He made a comment at one of the oil and gas meetings that I attended that's very germane. He says that the way the government funds things here, we've fostered a whole industry that's totally dependent upon IRAP grants and so forth. And you might want to get him in as a guest because he's quite outspoken on this matter.
Yeah.
And he's been there, done that. And you'll find that not just the university, but our entire public sector, when you look at the overall province, something in the statistics that often is overlooked with oil and gas and forestry and all that sort of stuff is that we've been given a gift here that other provinces would just give their eye teeth for, okay? With the oil and gas, we've managed to screw it up for just royally. Look at how much is left on the Heritage Trust Fund.
Yeah.
And try to collect that money from somebody that they borrowed it to. What happened to all the money? It's very poor planning.
What did happen to the money? What did they do with the money?
Well, they lent it to Newfoundland, and when we asked it back, Newfoundland gave us the finger.
And Quebec, interest-free.
And that, well, don't get me started on that topic, but they've eaten our lunch.
I thought they actually used some of that trust fund money to supplement general revenue, which meant they were feeding what Albertans asked for. So when Prentice
Was
said,
that
look
actually
in the,
allowed under the way law he'd set it up?
so when Prentice said, look in the mirror, Albertans, your special interest groups all were at the trough asking for more money. Your unions, your universities, your health system, you
Right.
kept on pumping money into elevating the value of your public services to make them, quote, why did we have to be the best in the world? Why was it so meritorious to say we're going to build the best educational and the best health system? Why was that so important that we poured so much money from our Heritage Trust Fund into it? Well, part of it was to keep
I can speak on something personal experience. They have orientation to engineering practice in the 4th year for people. And some of us were there as speakers. I was part of a panel. And when you get up and tell them that the most important things that you need when you get out in practice, they haven't taught you at school, because professors are nice guys, but most of them haven't actually had real life experience running companies, etc. And so they didn't teach you how to find work or get jobs or get assignments in. Number 2, how to negotiate. And I'll pass on the 3rd item because we have mixed company in attendance right now.
It's okay.
I didn't get invited back. I wonder why.
Yeah.
Can I just say,
that's engineering guys yet, who should be more practical than anybody.
Go ahead, Paul.
Good evening, everyone. I've been a lurker for a couple of weeks, and I'm finding it fascinating. A couple of points. You talk about the education system. It needs a great big hammer to smash. And I looked at it through 2 different portals. My one son went to Waterloo, did computer engineering, did 1 term in, 1 term work, 1 term in for 5 years. And by the time he'd finished, he had 4 job offers, but he had already set himself up where he was going. He was a valuable commodity the day he walked out of school. The kids who leave university now after 4 years in solitary confinement don't know what's not from a hole in the ground. Right. They think they're entitled to a vice president's job because they might have a master's degree or something, and they don't know anything about life. And we had a very brief conversation during the week with Kelly on the topic of education. But I've always held, having other experiences, that university doesn't teach anything. It teaches them how to find stuff in a book, and critical thinking skills don't happen either. So if I had a huge hammer, I would smash the university system and rebuild it around what skills do you need. And I heard someone talk about life skills and business skills. I'm in Burlington, Ontario, close to McMaster, and I've been in and out in various departments and worked with the Forge and the Innovation Factory that they have set up there. And one of my projects was working with their, they call it the entrepreneurial engineering or engineering and entrepreneurial master's degree, where there's the engineering part of it is really important, but they are really graded on a project. They have to actually go out and create a business. And so just seeing these people walk out of a college with a very expensive piece of paper is useless. My day job for the last 20 or so plus years has been providing management consulting to law firms in Canada and in the US. And I want to tell you that after 20 years and probably a couple of thousand lawyers that I know, I can count this many that I would actually hire to work for me on projects, because most of them don't know. I've been able to put food on the table just because my partner and I have had to teach very experienced lawyers, very well-regarded $800, $900 an hour lawyers, the business side of their practice.
Right.
It's not coming in every quarter with a handout to get a draw and going out and dispensing wisdom. They still, many, I won't say all, but many, don't understand that they're running an entrepreneurial business, whether they're inside a 800-person law firm, they still are, they're running a business. And if I could just hold the mic for one more moment, getting back to the earlier topic of Alberta's dependence on energy and fuels. I spent a couple of years on the board of an organization called the Canadian Council for Emergency Preparedness. And we worked with municipalities and governments and very large companies. And what I learned there was that many or most companies don't have a very simple discussion about what if. It's like, what if a global pandemic happens to break next week, for example? And I'm listening to the tales of the Alberta oil and some of the conversation today about what sectors are moving and what sectors aren't. And it reminds me in some way, and I might be misguided, of the turn of the 20th century when some very prestigious horse and carriage companies were being faced with this automobile that was coming out. And the answer to many of them was, well, we're going to make ours faster by adding more horses, which the parallel is, how do we take the oil and make it smell better? And I got another topic, having dealt with hydrologists at McMaster who thank the oil fields for years, a lifetime of sponsored projects due to the contamination. But it's continually looking at the oil as the driver, instead of stepping back, and I may be grossly misinformed, and saying, what can we sell? What can we make Alberta good for that will bring the US up to us in droves and the global economy to us? And if that were my company, Alberta, and the portfolio were all the different industries, my first question would be, from a marketing perspective, where are the holes? And what can we do to make the hole, to fill the hole competitively that others aren't? And yeah, that's all I've got to say at the moment. Thanks.
I want to pick up on your first point, which was your experience with lawyers. And you made the observation that they don't appreciate that they're running a business. This is in fact a change, because they were once running a monopoly, but the monopoly has been broken because you've got mediation now, you have many more lawyers than you ever had before, and you have a much different consumer because the consumer is more knowledgeable about what to expect. So now they are running a business, and that calls for relational skills that they didn't need when they had a monopoly. So I think in defense of lawyers, they just haven't woken up to the fact that their industry has changed. And like Todd Hirsch used to say about boiling the frog, it was happening so slow that they didn't recognize it.
Well, let me just jump in. Australia and the UK have recognized it.
Yes, they have.
And they have got alternative business structures,
yeah,
where some of the largest law firm in the world right now is a publicly traded company of management consultants, and they are private equity companies that own law firms. And boy, oh boy, the exit was a crush when they took over, because business was what they were in. And the law societies in various provinces have looked at this. And I been on committees at the Ontario Bar, but I won't bore you with that. But the topic of you're running a business and the product is law, or the service is law, is still an issue keeps my bank account active.
No, Australia is doing the same thing in accounting as well. And I've been advising some others on how Canada really ought to learn some lessons from what Australia is doing in terms of its change management strategy and the professions, because it is well aware that the professions are in trouble, whether they realize it or not. They're overpriced and the market's changing and they're not ready and they're not adapting. So government is trying in its wisdom to introduce strategies to all of the professions to recognize that they're in the service business and and the monopolies are broken. And the government is going to play a role in helping those monopolies break. So the strategy of government is try not to break them. It's my motto used to be on my shirt when I was a consultant is never let them see you sweat, but stretch them, but don't break them. And as I was a good or maybe not such a good consultant because way too many organizations, I gave them too much information and scared the hell out of them, and they put the advice on the shelf. That's your 90%, Paul, that aren't ready to adapt. But the most sensitive part of the anatomy has to get pinched, and when it gets pinched, they'll finally start to change, and that's the pocketbook. When the $900 an hour guy isn't pulling it off anymore, it'll be over. Yeah, go ahead, Tom.
Yeah, in the first instance, you were talking about education and the changes that are coming down.
Yeah.
I really can't recommend enough this book called Grasp, and it's by a Sanjay Sarma, who's a professor at MIT, and his take on where education's going. And he sees it changing dramatically over the next years, mainly because of the same things that you were talking about, which is the disappearance of the expert, the changing of what the student's going to go out and work at, and all of these things that are the dynamics now and have been for quite a while on education. So I just can't recommend that book enough. It's just a fantastic book. And the other thing is, it's called Grasp, Grasp.
Okay, thank you.
The other thing is things are changing so fast, and I read books and magazines that are set in the world scene, and Biden is now onto green very, very strongly. And, I don't see how our economy can survive without being very, very aggressive in the green sector. And, there are things going on here in the area of drilling down to capture steam, to create electricity, various technologies that are out there that are quite green. And I think that we just don't have any option but to sort of get on the bandwagon and get going with it.
But does that come back to the point of what exactly is the opportunity? And from a very strictly simplistic marketing position, where's the opportunity You know, you can flog oil. Oil to me is not going to go away. Fossil fuels won't go away. But what else can make somebody want to invest? Like Apple has just opened up a campus in North Carolina, I think. $3 billion they're going to open up an East Coast. And that's going to bring thousands of jobs, and the economy is going to explode because of, as you said, the little ripple effect of bringing people in. But help me, because I'm not in Alberta, you know, what are the things that, besides chopping the trees down and killing the natural resource, what can be done, what to make it attractive to what industry that will bring people and money?
So
I have part of the answer for you.
Okay, go ahead.
Peter Lougheed, when he was alive, and other people have stated over and over again, the U.S. is eating our lunch. All this thing with the environmental stuff is just to out-negotiate us. We ship oil out of the province at a discount price to the world price. Okay? They've out-negotiated us for 50, 60 years. Number two, Lougheed and everybody else that's looked at this is, why are we shipping out our resource? Why aren't we manufacturing products in a finished form to send, and then we're real exporters? We've overlooked that and haven't done it well enough here. And I don't have to bail. I'm going to another live webinar on sales that starts at 5 o'clock. Anybody that's interested in film industry or something, I'm in the finance business. My number is displayed. I can help you out later on. But shipping oil out of the province at less than market rates, that's been going on. And the whole exercise in the United States with dirty oil and all this sort of stuff, it's just like the Chinese. When we were at one of the meetings, the long-term relationship is all BS. It's just for them to out-negotiate us and get a better price.
Okay, so send me your email. I will distribute that. Before you go, I'm going to give you two words. One being hydrogen is a strategy right now. So I don't think the government is totally naive to the fact that it needs to help the industry make a transition. And hydrogen seems to be one of the strategies which they're presenting.
I wanted to cause controversy with those comments, by the way.
Yeah, that's okay. But I think, I want to give a plus too, because if the government is aware and can help in any way, I think what it's trying to do is find value in what we have as a commodity and see if they can do a conversion of that, which is value added, into hydrogen. That does make sense. I mean, right now, I'd say I think that makes sense.
How did the government do with the last refinery that they financed and built northeast of Edmonton?
That's the one they're converting now to hydrogen.
Yeah, it is.
They lost their shirt on the thing so far.
Well, maybe now they can turn it around.
I think one of the questions.
June, oh.
Go ahead, Ilona.
June, before you go, Peter Lougheed said the Americans and everybody else were eating our lunch, but he is the first one who talked about diversification. And when the oil and gas companies, which are leaders in terms of environmental strategies in the world, when they refused to put any money into R&D, he called all the oil executives down into McDougall House, and he said, okay, guys, you're either going to have increased taxes or you are going to have put some money into R&D. And that's how we ended up with the R&D, which we have, which was a leader, which were leaders around the world. Look at sulfur capture, what's going on in the Athabasca oil sands, all of that stuff. So I will just shut up for the time being.
I thank you for the comment.
Yeah, but I do want to pick up on the comment you made. I'd like to, it's too bad you can't stay for the discussion on film because we are going to get to that before 5:30. Someone else had a hand up there.
I just like to say very quickly, it sounds like there's a clue that, look, it's being really close to the page. It's all oil and gas. But if you take 2 steps back, what's wrong with Alberta being the energy capital of the world and define energy in a very different way other than the fossil fuels coming out of the ground?
100%.
And then you've got a platform.
That's where I'm going, and hopefully you guys will join me.
Well, Peter and Paul, Peter, you're my son's names are Peter and Paul, so this is easy. I think this is exactly what we are seeing the oil and gas industry in Alberta is trying to do, is one, brand itself as a clean source of energy because of the amount of finance that they're putting into research to clean up the oil sands. But secondly, this energy capital through introducing hydrogen does make a great deal of sense.
And,
So
and new fuels and stuff that we know how to do right now that is cleaner and that we can navigate. So parallel track, because hydrogen is going to be a while before it becomes economically feasible.
So the strategy that Donna Kennedy Glanz, who spoke to us, a friend of Heather, by the way, Ilona,
Yes.
Donna Kennedy Glanz, when we brought her to the table in 2015 at our Creativity and Convergence conference, talked about transition. She didn't talk about closing it down. She talked about how to execute a transition in Alberta's oil and gas industry to green, hydrogen being a form of clean. I mean, green hydrogen plays a significant role in helping cleaning up the economy. So I think there's some things underway that are positive. I don't want this forum to get on the brand of only thinking about like Eeyore, I lost my tail and poor us. I mean, there are things that are going on. There are adjustments. Go ahead, Ling.
I think we should think about something different. I think Alberta has been playing defense for too long. I think our government or the people, industrial players, are playing the same line, try to defend. And you can't defend when so many people attack you. Look at the TikTok, look at everywhere else. Everybody look at Alberta, and I saw TikTok people talk about, oh, don't go that place, it's dirty. When I talk to people, people have no idea. That's just perception. What I think we should do as a province is we should have some more offensive approach instead of a defensive approach, getting the message out in a different way, not just play their line, play a different line. So that's first thing. I think we have to have someone talk about differently. The second thing is we talk about diversification, we talk about oil and gas. Well, guess what? When oil and gas are really good, no one really care about diversification. They just pocket all the monies. So I think this is something, it's more a long-term strategy plan. And I don't see our governments doing it. I think, if you look at the Chinese, they're doing very well in that space. They're planning for long-term, how they defend something, how they actually defend some strategies. I think that needs to be played in this space. And that's my 2 cents. Every time I look at this, I say, what, we're doing wrong here. We just play defense. We try to defend ourselves, be a veteran, and just being punched by, on the face by everyone. We have to play a different role. I think we have to tell a different story. Look at the cars driving. I mean, think about if someone is spreading this message, what if the whole world tomorrow without also fossil fuel? What's going to happen? No one's painting these pictures. Everybody thinks tomorrow, if we shut down the oil, the world will be just clean. And people never thought about if we shut down oil and gas, the world will be end tomorrow.
There's a fundamental difference, though, here between the value set that exists, say, in Canada, on the value of individual initiative and individual expression versus centralized control and centralized decision-making. So in the last week, I had an opportunity to get exposed to what was going on in China in the development of their rapid transit system. It can't fail to impress you that the 65,000 kilometers of rapid speed rail have been put into place faster than we could build a freaking bridge in Edmonton.
Yeah.
Now that was possible because of centralized control.
No, not just no. That's wrong.
But wait a minute, Ling. I'm buying into your argument, but I'm talking to you about the price that one would need to pay to put that in place, and whether or not that's acceptable in a democracy or not. And unfortunately, as correct as you may well be, and I am absolutely envious of seeing the modern technology and the rate at which China is making the transition that is underway. But the price that North America would have to pay in order to go there and adopt that strategy is not going to be acceptable. That's the unfortunate reality. So what do we do? What we need to do, because there is an answer.
Okay.
Is we need
Centralized control is only one thing.
we need to champion, and I think it's underway. We need to champion individual entrepreneurial initiative.
Yes. So let me tell you, centralized control in China is only one story. People don't realize there's another side of the story. That's actually government get every people buying into this. Okay, buying into success story, and then people will actually for it.
The extent to which capitalism exists in China is envious.
Oh,
I mean, the money is flowing from the individual into enterprises in China that are aligned with high-speed rail or through their stock market into what they want to do with alternative energies. But the government is setting the strategic direction and aligning the institutions of their country to be in line with what the party feels is the right future. In North America, we believe that it's a bottom-up strategy that should be derived, not a top-down, even if it's a party that has been elected, the one party. So I think where we're in agreement is we need initiative and we need change, and whether we're going to get it fast enough to be competitive, I'm somewhat skeptical. I started the Alberta Council of Technologies personally out of frustration that the institutions of the future in Canada have not yet been invented, and that neither the government nor the universities nor the Alberta Research Council are prepared to make the changes necessary to effect change at the rate to enable us to be competitive. And so far, I haven't seen the universities until they have the cutbacks, and I haven't seen the governments. I haven't seen them aligned to bring about change.
Harry, I've come up with a theory recently in social psychology that I think may explain the human propensity for two different forms of social organization. One, the hierarchical, with steep hierarchy with some single person at the top, authoritarian, in times of crisis. And when fear will force us to come together, play a role, at least temporarily, to take orders and issue orders that is in a coordinated fashion, like in a defensive strategy. And other times when things are good, we have more of the lateral kind of relationships that you were talking about earlier, where it's peer-to-peer, and we're a more creative, innovative, and entrepreneurial. But we kind of, in human nature, like in the smaller communities, it might have been more evident that there's two different modes of operation.
Well,
but these have become institutionalized in left-wing, right-wing politics, and they're not realistic. They should be more agile and flexible depending on their requirements.
I think both are in trouble, though. I mean, your view of that authoritarian, even benevolent dictatorship model where there's an authority at the top is being eroded by social media. I mean, I don't think you can get collective behavior as you once may well have been able to do, because there are too many. The special interests in Canada today, how many people exist in Canada? What, 45 million?
Well, there's a competition between
45 million people each have an individual opinion and the capacity to express it individually. This is a massive problem for getting collective commitment to even COVID. I mean, the COVID experience is exactly what you would predict, where you have so many people believing that they have knowledge and that they can acquire it and they can challenge the authority.
But you have those competing hierarchies, like those on the left versus on the right. I think there isn't a single hierarchy here like you would have maybe in China, but you have those that are voluntarily lining up behind one thought leader or another, the conspiracy theorists on one hand, or the woke people on the other side.
Well,
saying,
in an environment of chaos, no authority has yet stepped forward to be able to unify a collective.
And Perry, I agree with you that our democracies are in an impossible position and are very much at risk. And the thing that we've been talking about relative to knowledge, don't confuse, or I don't, this is how I sort it out. Maybe it's too simplified. Don't confuse knowledge and information. Social media deals with a whole bunch of data and they put it out there. But the people that will succeed are the people that will bring the information together in certain areas with certain strategies around it, and turned it into knowledge, and then action on knowledge. The knowledge in itself is powerful, but it's not powerful enough. You've got to have an action plan on top of that. Your high-speed rail thing in China, I'm probably the only one on the call, maybe one of two or three, that can actually get onto a high-speed rail in China on my own and travel from one end of China to the other.
So what were your what was your impression?
My impression is that we need it everywhere. We need high-speed rail here, you know.
Right.
It's and the other argument about let's refine what we talk about energy. Remember that we've built 7 edible oil refineries since the last petroleum refinery was built in Western Canada. And energy isn't just firing the house so it cools off or warms up or whatever. Energy is we're providing the energy today for the people of China to do what they're doing, because it's called nutrition and it's called agriculture and food. And we have a huge opportunity in these areas, including hydrogen, but we need to lump it all together and say, okay, what pieces do we have a competitive advantage over the rest of the world?
I mean, Barry, that principle of what advantage do we have over every other place in the world that would give us a unique position is not a unique question to any industry in Alberta. I mean, every industry is asking that question. Tourism is asking that question. Agriculture is asking that question. Energy is asking that question. Transportation, everybody asks that question from bottom up, is how do we, in our 20 different industries that, you know, I look at, agriculture certainly is very high on the list. That Creativity and Convergence Conference said, we've probably got more opportunities in agriculture than we realize. I mean, and you know my views on hemp, which is an industrial material. Hemp is just not for cloth. Hemp can be used for making everything from concrete to airplane wings. It's an alternative to plastics. I personally have been a very strong believer that we have an opportunity in to dominate North America's supply of industrial hemp.
Here.
And we're working on it.
And the farmer that I was talking to yesterday, he has a neighbor who planted 1,000 acres of hemp, which is not negligible.
Right.
And he didn't plant, guy's name is Roy. Roy didn't plant it for a second year for whatever reason. And so I was going to find out. I'm an old farm.
Well, I can tell you why, because he's been promised that someone would buy his hemp. And hemp needs to be processed. And the cost of processing hemp is called decortication. And the cost of a decortication plant was $10 million until someone came along and figured out a way to build a decorticator at $100,000. And this could be a massive transition in the industry, but that company is acting alone. It can't get bank financing. It has to find individual financing to grow it. Well, that's the North American model. In China, that body may well go to the top and be able to find that they have decided they want to build a hemp industry, and the government will align the various institutions to make sure it happens. In North America, the guy at the bottom has to prove to the institutions at the top to do things differently.
Yeah, and you know, when it's used as a building material, it is fire resistant. You can hold a blowtorch to hemp.
It's lightweight. It's easier to transport. It's cheaper.
It's cheaper, and it pulls CO2 out of the atmosphere at an equivalent rate of mature trees, and even better. So I can
Well-
give you 6 advantages right off the
Well,
top.
and I'll give you 7 because it's,
Sure.
I mean, for those of you that know, and Barry, I think you're aware of my views on hemp, and you know, you played a role with it with the Agricultural Food Council. But I don't need to go there because I'm a very strong advocate of agriculture and specifically hemp crossing over and becoming an industrial player. Not just
The Perry, your comment about the Chinese and how they might take on hemp as a focus. It's been a major focus of theirs for 5 years.
Right. Well, we
can supply them with that. We have the capability of becoming a major supplier for their technology, not just, you know, their gene pool. And
they're asking for processed hemp. The order that I've seen, the purchase order for 65,000 tons of hemp is not for raw hemp. They want to see it processed because it's lighter weight when it's processed. We need that processing capability. So that's what we've been working on. But, you know, that we could take that as an example. I'm just not sure it would be of interest to the group as a whole. But if there are those of you that have an interest in hemp, you know, let me know and I'll introduce you to those that are championing and advocates for that industry. Let me make one more transition because we've got about 10 minutes into this discussion around film. Several of you, Tom and Perry, who's not here today, have from time to time expressed frustration that it's difficult times, that Calgary seems to be on good times and Edmonton continues to fall on hard times. So a few of us have gotten together to take a look at if there's anything that we might do to help advance the cause of developing and help the film industry, or a component of it, because it's a very big industry. And some have gotten together with the film industry representatives to take a look at whether there's something that could be done. Well, recently Ling came to me and he said there are processes in film production that could be addressed with a new technology. And that technology has the capability of not only providing employment opportunities in Edmonton or in Canada, to address a particular process that is fundamental to film production. So they brought that to my attention and I did what I do. I mean, I didn't lay money out, but I began to introduce them to people who have influence in that industry that may well be able to look at that technology, Ling, and decide whether or not they could help in piloting it or in fact, financing it. So I've made an initial introduction and we'll be making, you know, others in the coming week. But I think that's the way we should be able to do more of that in this country. And that is to build the networks around technologies so that those in the industry that have ideas or that have needs can find more quickly what they're looking for to become competitive. But so far we built a lot of academics that do a lot of talking and very little relationship building. I mean, Randy, that was my frustration with WED and continues to be that their primary methods were financing and regulatory. And what we needed was more network development in order for the industry to survive and thrive on its own. And I'm not being critical of you, but I'm being critical that government way too often failed in the building of communities of interest.
Yeah,
Those communities were critical.
I was studying industry clusters, but long before our department was talking about it.
Well, that's why you're here.
There's a lot of, well, I was always a networker too. But you're right. And there's a lot of work done around the world. For example, trying to clone Silicon Valley's magic formula. And of course, rainforest is one way to try to do that. But we have a film industry association here, right? I just can't think of the name. AMPIA, right. I was a member for a short while, 20 years ago. And maybe there's more that that organization can do to become a central booster for the industry. But bringing in ideas of industry cluster optimization, something that unless you're more of a generalist in economic development, you don't necessarily understand.
Well, I mean, I'm beginning to become familiar with a brand new industry, and that's the fun part. It's like a hobby. that if you have a particular interest, you go in and study it. And in the studying of it, you begin to see the strengths and the weaknesses and the opportunities and the threats. And I hear of some of these industry associations and I want to throw up. Because
Yeah,
as far as
but,
accountability goes, I see zero. And
Yeah.
yet the persons are being financed by some government entity that doesn't seem to hold the 23,000 NGOs we have in Canada that people will point to and say, but we have an NGO. Well, most of them, in my opinion, have been failing their constituency. Either one, they have been growing the constituency. Two, they don't have any results to show for it, other than they get government grants that continue to reinforce the status quo. So that section should be blown up as well. Go ahead, Tom.
Wow. Yeah, the film industry is a particularly strange duck. That's all I can say. And
Was that a D? Was that a D?
yeah,
Okay.
strange,
The other two.
well, and it's there's a lot of people out there with opinions on it and with lots of ideas and lots of, we used to, when I was a documentary producer, we used to say that, idea, everybody's got a bloody idea. And I'd get approached all the time, and my assistant one day, he said, Tom, ideas are like assholes. We all have them, so that was summed it up in the film business. So now if you're going to go into the film business, you are trying to source out what is marketable, what the business is going to want, and all of that stuff, constantly trying to figure out where the market trends are going. But we can do it well here in Canada, mostly on the East Coast. The West Coast is more a service industry. It's a different business. Though BC does do some of its own productions, it's the East Coast where you get Schitt's Creek and productions like that. Mind you, I should say in Calgary, we have Heartland and Tom Cox, who is probably the most successful producer in the province, I think, over the years. Wouldn't you say, Leona?
I would agree with that, Tom. But
Yeah.
I would also like to add to that, and in order to understand the film industry, you need to understand two things. First of all, Heartland is enormously successful, one of the best ever coming out of Canada. However, it's based on an American short story collection, a British short story collection written in Carolina, which then a Los Angeles producer read and then brought to Alberta because it was cheap here. So in order to understand the film industry, you need to understand two things. You need to understand runaways. Runaways are, they bring in the Americans or whoever it is, they use Alberta as Colorado's landscape or Arizona or whatever it is, and then all the money goes away. The second thing you need to understand is a slate, which is a group of productions like a stable of racehorses. You have one that wins, you have 3 or 4 that maybe win, and you have a couple of duds. And the funding government agencies, which everybody in the film industry has their hand out, they always say, give us the money, or it's a turnkey operation. We do not have an Indigenous film creativity group here in Alberta because it's all done now by Excel sheet, and you have to tick off the boxes. And Excel sheets do not make good creative material. I'm sorry.
And they're so painful, eh?
Yeah.
You go through these different groups, and they at the end they want to tell you how to make your film.
That's
they want,
right.
oh yeah, that's very nice, but if you slanted it this way, maybe you could get this market on this film. And it's a sexy business, everybody thinks, oh yeah, this is a really cool industry to be involved in, and we can come up with something that will really turn people's heads. And it's hard,
How would government even lean into this space? Because I'm into the entertainment space as well, and I know that we do amazing technologies around music and new sound systems, and there's a lot of technology in the background, but picking the winners and losers in entertainment is just a fragment of, if you think about entrepreneurs and how many try and then die, but if you look in the entertainment industry, the amount of stuff that dies and falls on the floor is like enormous. So I don't even know how the government can help it.
But let's stay away from government.
Yeah.
You know, one of the things I tell people about this network, let's keep government off the table for a moment.
Okay.
What can we do
Yeah.
to make
all
a
right.
difference? To build an industry. An industry is not a government. An industry is an industry where those
Okay.
with an interest in film, for example, have decided to come together to sacrifice a little bit in the interest of building an industry and yet exercise their businesses. So Alona and Perry and Tom and Ling and Peter, you seem to have an interest in film.
Yeah.
Have you talked to one another, or do we simply come to these sessions and tell me about the problems? Have you gotten together to talk about a strategy? The discussions I had a week or two ago with several people about the future of the film industry said we lack leadership. That leadership would bring the parties together to have a discussion and get on with building a strategy to make sure that people were aligned with that strategy. I don't think that's happening. I think we have a lot of people that are concerned, but they haven't yet gotten together, and that's leadership. So where do you get the leadership from? Is it in this group or is it in someone else? And I've been searching for where is the person that could play a leadership role outside of government in getting those like you together, because I don't think they're the industry associations. I haven't heard anything about industry association, any one of them, maybe other than in Calgary. And the guy in Calgary, interestingly enough, did not have filmistry in his background. He had leadership in his background.
That's
Yeah.
right.
Well, he thought about the studio down there, you know. Which,
So guys,
is
it's now 15 seconds to 5:30. And you either heard what I have to say as an insult, or you heard what I had to say as a challenge. Get on with it and come tell us what you do besides coming here and telling me there's a problem. Do something about it and bring to us an idea.
Totally respect. I mean, Perry, thanks so much. So I just posted my email address.
Okay.
I can tell you my interest. I have created an autism employment program.
Yep.
The people with autism are very good at doing repetitive things in a long haul. So they are very good at doing like the logo scoping or something in the post-production. So we already invest the money. We already invest the time, try to get into that picture in addition to digitization. So here's my interest. Here's my email. If you think it's something we can do together, we're definitely interested. I come from a movie family.
Yep.
Both my parents are actually movie makers. So I totally understand the whole movie industry. But my interest is very clear. I want to create a job for people with autism. I
Great.
understand this is a role to play. So if you guys to see it, let me know.
That's a perfect wrap up, Ling. Alona, I think you and Ling ought to have a conversation.
Yeah,
Tom,
and
that's an introduction, maybe even wayfinders, but Peter for sure. So I'm
Yeah.
going to leave it at that. I'm going to thank Claire. We can close off the session. That was a good wrap up. That's exactly what we should be doing. So thank you all very much. Good night.
okay.
See you guys.
Good
Thanks,
night.
Barry. Thanks,
Thank you.
everybody. Nice meeting you.